He grabbed my wrist so hard I thought he was going to pull me off my feet. I'd been standing near the edge of the reception hall, holding a glass of sparkling water I hadn't touched, trying to look like I belonged there. The Veterans Appreciation Gala. My coworker Diane had given me her extra ticket because she couldn't make it, and I'd come mostly because I had nowhere else to be that Saturday and the venue was nice and I thought maybe it would do me some good to be around people. The man who grabbed my wrist was old. Late 70s, maybe 80. Silver hair, a dark suit with more medals on the lapel than I could count. His eyes were locked on my hand, my left hand. The one with the bracelet. "Where did you get that?" he said. Not a question. His voice was completely flat. "She passed away last month." I wear it sometimes. He looked up at me then, and I've never seen an expression like that on a person's face before. It wasn't grief exactly. It was something older than grief. Recognition, maybe. The way you look at something you thought was gone forever. He said very quietly, "Do you know what that bracelet is?" I didn't. I told him no. I'd always thought it was just jewelry. He let go of my wrist. He stepped back. He pressed his hand over his mouth for a second, like he was collecting himself. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to understand that I have never told anyone this in 32 years. My grandmother's name was Ruth. Ruth Elaine Kavanagh, though she'd been a Kowalski before she married my grandfather, who died of a heart attack when I was 4. I barely remembered him. But I remembered her. She was small. That's what I always thought first when I pictured her. How small she was. 5'1" on a good day, with hands that were always slightly cold and hair that had been white for as long as I'd known her. She lived in a ranch house in Harrodsburg, Kentucky, about 40 minutes from where I grew up in Lexington. She kept a garden, tomatoes, mostly, and a row of marigolds along the front walk because she said they kept the bugs away. She was a seamstress. That was the word she used for herself, seamstress, even though nobody really said that anymore. She'd worked at a dry cleaning shop in town for years, and after she retired, she still took in alterations from neighbors. Wedding dresses, mostly. She had a reputation for being good with lace. That was the whole picture of her, the whole picture I'd ever been given. I found out she died the way I found out most things in my family, late and secondhand. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening and said, "Oh, by the way, Grandma Ruth passed on Sunday." Just like that. "By the way, the way you'd mentioned that the grocery store was out of a thing you wanted." "Sunday," I said. "It's Tuesday. We didn't want to bother you during your work week." She was my grandmother. My mother sighed. She had a very specific sigh she used when she felt she was being accused of something unfairly. "Vivian, we handled everything. There's nothing for you to do." There was a small service on Thursday. My parents didn't go. My aunt didn't go. My mother said it was a long drive and there was nothing to gain by it, that Grandma Ruth had lived a full life and she would have understood. I drove the 40 minutes myself and sat in the third row of a funeral parlor in Harrodsburg with 7 other people, most of whom I didn't recognize, while a minister who had clearly never met her read from a prepared card. She deserved better than that. She deserved a lot better than that. After I went to her house, my parents had already arranged for a company to come and clear it out the following week. They'd had the foresight to plan all of that without telling me, so I had a few days before everything disappeared. I let myself in with the spare key she'd kept under a ceramic frog by the back door for as long as I could remember. It smelled like her, lavender and something underneath it, something warmer, like old wood and wool. I stood in the kitchen for a while and didn't do anything, just stood there while the refrigerator hummed and the afternoon light came through the curtains she'd made herself, yellow cotton with small white flowers. I don't know how long I stood there, a while. I went through the house slowly. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just wanted to be there one more time before the company came with their boxes and their efficiency. Her bedroom was neat, bed made, reading glasses folded on the nightstand next to a library book that was probably overdue. Her sewing room smelled like machine oil and thread. Spools of it everywhere, organized by color in a wooden rack she'd built herself. Or maybe my grandfather had built it. I didn't know. In the closet of the sewing room, on the highest shelf, there was a shoebox. I almost didn't take it down. It was dusty, and I assumed it was patterns or old receipts or something administrative that I didn't have the energy for, but I pulled it down anyway and carried it to the kitchen table and opened it. There was a stack of letters, rubber banded together, a photograph, a folded document I couldn't make sense of, printed on paper that felt different from regular paper, thicker, slightly waxy, and at the bottom of the box, wrapped loosely in a piece of blue velvet, the bracelet. It wasn't pretty, exactly. That's the first thing I noticed. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd buy at a jewelry counter. It was silver, or something that looked like silver, a flat chain with a rectangular plate in the center. On the plate were 3 rows of tiny markings, numbers and letters, stamped deep into the metal. It looked like a medical alert bracelet or a dog tag that someone had refashioned into something you could wear on your wrist. I put it on. I didn't know why. It just seemed like the right thing to do. I took the box with me when I left. I told myself I'd go through the letters later. I never did, not really. I'd open the box sometimes and look at them but not read them. I don't know what I was afraid of. I wore the bracelet almost every day. People rarely noticed it. Sometimes they'd glance at the plate and look away, assuming it was a medical alert for something, which meant they deliberately didn't ask. That was fine. I liked wearing it. It felt like carrying a small piece of her with me. That was how I ended up at the Veterans Gala with it on my wrist. Diane's spare ticket, a hotel ballroom in downtown Lexington, people in suits and people in dress uniforms, and me in a green wrap dress holding a glass of sparkling water I hadn't touched, and the old man with the medals, reaching for my wrist. His name was General Harrison Pruett, retired. He insisted I call him Harrison. We found a quiet table near the back of the room, away from the speeches, and he sat across from me and looked at the bracelet for a long time without saying anything. "Your grandmother's full name," he finally said. "Ruth Elaine Kavanaugh, that's right." He nodded slowly. "She went by Elaine, in the program. She used her middle name." "I didn't know that. There's a lot you don't know," he said. He wasn't being unkind. He was just being accurate. "A lot that I am legally not supposed to tell you. I want to be clear about that up front because what I'm about to say is," he stopped, started again. "The program has been inactive since 2011. The classification on most of it was reduced 3 years ago. I've spoken with legal counsel about what I can and cannot discuss in the event that I ever encountered a situation like this. So I am not acting recklessly. I want you to understand that." "Okay," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "Your grandmother was not a seamstress," he said. "Or rather, she was. And that was real. She was genuinely skilled at it. But her work at the dry cleaning shop was a cover. She was recruited in 1979 by a federal intelligence program that I am not going to name. The program used civilian contractors, people who had no military background, no profile, no reason to be suspected of anything, as information couriers and intelligence supports in rural and semi-rural areas of the country. The idea was that these people were the last ones anyone would ever look at." I stared at him. "She was active from 1979 to 2009, he said. "She was a dry cleaning seamstress from Harrodsburg." "She was a dry cleaning seamstress from Harrodsburg," he agreed, "who memorized dead drop locations and carried sensitive materials in the lining of other people's clothing for 30 years without once being compromised." I looked down at the bracelet on my wrist. "That's an identification piece," he said, nodding at it. "Every contractor in the program had one. They were made to look like medical alert jewelry so they could be worn in plain sight. The markings identify the program, her contractor number, and a verification code. If she had ever been in an emergency situation, ever needed to make contact or signal someone, she could show that to the right person and receive assistance." He paused. "She never needed to use it. In 30 years, she never once needed to use it. She was paid?" "She was compensated, yes, not extravagantly. Enough to supplement the shop income. The payments would have been structured to look unremarkable, ordinary bank deposits. She would have known how to account for them." I thought about her house, the modest little ranch house, the yellow curtains she'd made herself, the library book on her nightstand. I thought about the Christmas gifts she'd given me, always thoughtful, never lavish, a sweater she'd knitted herself, a paperback she thought I'd enjoy. I had always assumed she just didn't have much money. That had been the assumption. Nobody questioned it. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Harrison looked at the bracelet again. Then he looked at me. "Because she's dead," he said quietly, "and nobody came to her funeral." I felt that land somewhere in my chest. "I was one of her handlers for the last 12 years of her tenure," he said. "I knew her as Elaine. I met her in person 4 times in 12 years. Once in 1997, once in 2003, and twice in 2008 during the decommissioning process. Each time she was exactly the same. Completely calm, completely professional, not a trace of." He shook his head slightly. "Most people in that work develop a kind of armor, a detachment. She never seemed to need it. She was just steady, like something that had always been there and always would be." He folded his hands on the table. "I looked for her obituary a few years ago. I looked for all of them, the ones I'd worked with. Some of the others had services, veteran cemeteries, honors, family present. She had 2 lines in a county paper. His voice was very controlled. 2 lines. Ruth Elaine Kavanagh, 81, of Harrodsburg. She is survived by her daughter and son-in-law and grandchildren. Services were private. Private meant nobody came, I said. It meant nobody came, he said. We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, the gala went on, conversations and silverware and someone at the podium saying something about sacrifice and service. I can't give you the documents, he said, but I can write you a letter, a personal letter, not an official one, that tells you some of what she did, what her work meant, not specifics, but something that's yours to keep. I nodded. I couldn't speak right then. She would have hated a fuss, he added with something that was almost a smile. She was very clear about that. The one time I mentioned that contractors like her deserved more recognition, she told me. He paused, like he was deciding whether to share this. She said, "General, I didn't do it to be thanked. I did it because it needed doing and I was the right person to do it quietly." That was her exact phrase. I needed doing and I was the right person to do it quietly. I looked down at the bracelet. I thought about the 30 years, 1979 to 2009. I was born in 1993. She had already been doing it for 14 years when I came into the world. She had held me as a baby with hands that had carried intelligence materials through the lining of strangers' coats. She had helped me with my homework and grown tomatoes and watched Wheel of Fortune on Tuesday nights and taken in wedding dresses for alterations and done all of it on top of 30 years of work that nobody in her family had known about, that nobody had asked about, that nobody had thought to wonder about, because she was just Grandma Ruth, small and steady, always there when you needed her, easy to overlook. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone. By the way, I called my mother that night from the hotel parking lot. It was almost 11 o'clock. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding annoyed. "Vivian, it's late. I need to tell you something," I said. "About Grandma Ruth." There was a silence. I told her everything I was allowed to tell her, which wasn't much, that I had met someone at the gala who had known her, who had worked with her, who had told me that her life was more than what we had assumed it was. I told her about the bracelet and what it was. I told her about the 30 years. My mother was quiet for a long time after I finished. "That can't be right," she said finally. "She was a seamstress." "She was a seamstress," I said. "And she was other things too. We just never asked." Another silence. "I don't know how we were supposed to know," my mother said. She sounded defensive, and then something shifted in her voice, something cracked a little. "Vivian, I don't know how we were supposed to know." "We weren't," I said. "That was the whole point. We weren't supposed to know." I heard her breathing on the other end of the line. "We should have been there," she said, very quietly. "At the service, yes. I know that. I've known that." I told myself it was practical, the distance, the time, there was nothing we could. She stopped. "I knew it wasn't right. I've known it wasn't right." "I know, Mom." The parking lot was empty and cold. I sat on the hood of my car and looked at the bracelet in the yellow light coming from the hotel entrance. "What do we do?" my mother asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "But I think we start by saying her name out loud more. I think we start there." Harrison sent me the letter 3 weeks later. 4 pages, handwritten, in small, precise script. He told me about specific operations he could reference without compromising anything classified. He told me about a situation in 1994 where her quick thinking, he didn't specify, he just said her quick thinking had prevented something significant from going wrong. He told me that she had been given an internal commendation in 2001 that she would never have known the full weight of because the language had been deliberately vague to protect her cover. He told me that in 30 years had a single complaint about her work, not one. He ended the letter by saying, "I don't know if any of this helps. I hope it does. She deserved to be known." I read it twice at my kitchen table and then I held it in my hands for a long time. I have a box now. Not a shoebox, a real box, cedar, with a small clasp. I bought it specifically. Inside it, I keep the letters from her closet, which I finally read. They're not classified, they're just personal. Notes from friends, a few from my grandfather during a period when he was working out of state. A pressed marigold, dry and flat. The photograph from the shoebox, which shows a younger version of her standing outside a building I don't recognize, in clothes from what looks like the early 1980s, smiling at whoever was behind the camera. She looks exactly like herself, exactly the way I remember her, small and steady and calm. And the bracelet. I keep the bracelet in the box now, wrapped in that piece of blue velvet. I still wear it sometimes. Not every day, but sometimes. On days when who hold things together are often the ones who do it without any announcement at all. My parents drove up to Harrodsburg in October, all three of us, together. We went to the cemetery, which I had never visited before. Her name is on a small granite marker next to my grandfather's. Ruth Elaine Kavanaugh, beloved wife and grandmother. My mother brought marigolds. I don't know whose idea that was. She just showed up with them in a paper cone from the grocery store, and when I looked at her, she shrugged a little and said, "She liked them, didn't she?" We stood there for a while. No one said anything formal. There was nothing formal to say. I thought about what Harrison had written at the end of his letter. She deserved to be known. I thought about how the knowing had come too late, the way it always seems to, and how that was a particular kind of grief that didn't have a clean name. And I thought about the 30 years she'd spent being the right person to do something quietly, without asking for anything back, without needing anyone to notice. She didn't need me to tell this story, but I'm telling it anyway, because maybe someone out there has a grandmother they've been meaning to call, or a grandfather they assumed they understood, or someone small and steady in their life who grows tomatoes and watches game shows and seems perfectly ordinary and is carrying something enormous in absolute silence. Call them, ask them something real. Not how are you, but something real. You might be surprised what you've been standing next to all along.